Mila mamo pole pobeliava. Thank you. That was, thank you. Thank you. That was Pole Pobeliava, The Field Grows White, a song that the women from the Pazarjic region of Bulgaria used to sing when they would reap the fields, gathering the wheat. And I wanted to open with that to wake you up, but also maybe to show those of you who aren't familiar with Bulgarian folk singing, with the Bulgarian voice, the Bulgarian female voice, a taste, because that voice has been inspiring me and been my guide for the last 30 years. Way back in 1992, when I was a freshman from suburban Minnesota who landed at Yale, and I was feeling a little anxious, a little out of my depth, and I was looking for a way to fit into that intimidating new space. So I let my roommate drag me along to a Yale Slavic chorus tryout. When the choir belted out the first notes of a Bulgarian folk song at sternum-shattering volume, my mind was blown. The loud, unapologetic, joyful female voices, it made my hair stand on end and my entire being resonate. And I made a vow to myself there and then. I said, I am going to learn to make my voice sound like that. And so I followed the Bulgarian voice, and it has taken me on a wild and wonderful journey that my 18-year-old self could never have imagined. But before we head down that road, let's talk about how I ended up at Yale in the first place. So I'm not going to lie, and this may come as a surprise to some of you who know me, but I was a nerd in high school. Okay, so I tried to disguise it under a punk rock exterior, but underneath those chains and spikes, I may as well have been wearing a pocket protector. I was on the math team. I was on the chess team, quiz bowl, debate, whatever it came to memorizing facts, constructing logical arguments, taking standardized tests, I was the ultimate overachiever. Maybe it was my German heritage, or it was just a fluke that I was born with a mind so rational that Descartes himself would have gasped in delight. The kind of mind that the Western educational system valorizes to the extreme. Facts, logics, memory. You know, all that mushy, touchy-feeling stuff. We can leave that for the artists and the priests. So I'm sure all the AUB students here are much more well-rounded than I was at that age. But considering how hard it is to get in here, I assume that maybe even a few of you resonate with this snapshot of my younger self. Anyway, so there I was at Yale, like a deer in the headlights. And unfortunately, the most popular class of all time at Yale, Psychology and the Good Life, otherwise known as the Yale Happiness class, was not yet on offer. So while I was happy to be at Yale, psychologically speaking, I was a head case. Anxious, perfectionist, super self-critical. And although I didn't realize it then, I had run up against the fundamental problem of Cartesian dualism. I had honed my rational mind to the extreme, but I had no idea what to do with my feelings, my body, my soul. So I can only thank God that in the guise of my roommate Elena, nudged me towards the Yale Slavic chorus and introduced me to the Bulgarian voice, and blessed me with enough sense to realize that, as irrational as it might sound, that voice had a very important message for me. So since I am still a nerd, albeit in a slightly different disguise, please indulge me while I tell you a little bit about the mechanics of Bulgarian vocal production. So this very scientific drawing shows you the anatomy of the voice. How many singers do we have? People that have done classical choral singing. This is necessarily going to be very simplified, but one of the tenets of sort of Western classical singing is that you want to keep your voice, your throat open, and that red arrow, your soft palate, lowered. So all that air you're pushing up with your active diaphragm could go into your nasal and into your oral cavities. This is what classical singers sometimes call the voice, the mask, resonating in the mask. And it gives a very specific bright timbre. And while this is lovely in its own right, and I don't mean any shade to opera singers, I have never had any desire to have my voice sound like that because I've been trapped in my head long enough as it is. No, I fell in love at first sound with the Bulgarian voice because it bypasses the head entirely. It's just like chest and straight out. Many people, when they hear Bulgarian folk singing for the first time, they mistakenly describe it as nasal because it's a very sharp timbre. But actually, if we look, the soft palate is raised, so it's completely blocking air from resonating in the nasal chamber. So if any of you have heard the musical theater term belting, I believe it's a somewhat similar technique, a very strong chest voice with no falsetto. So if you've truly mastered the Bulgarian voice, you really shouldn't have any resonance above here. And the way you can test yourself to see if you're doing it right is that when you sing and plug your nose, the sound shouldn't change. So let's try it, right? Hey, hey! Okay, so but beyond the techniques of, thank you. You can all try this at home. Beyond the vocal techniques, I believe that the way Bulgarian women traditionally sang also has contributed to the sort of open-hearted physicality of this practice. Bulgarian ethnographers have documented that young girls, from a young age, they would sing with sisters, cousins, neighbors, and often would sing with the same women for their entire lives. So this was a very intense social and intimate connection. The last thing we need to know about Bulgarian folk singing is that some of the intervals that Bulgarian folk singers use might sound dissonant or out of tune to the Western ear, major, minor, seconds, but actually these are consonant intervals that are sought after in the tradition. So taking everything we now know together, let's just imagine the intense physical experience of a Bulgarian folk singer. You're close, maybe even face to face with your lifelong singing sister, belting out a major second. You can feel your own voice in your chest, but you can feel hers too. You can literally feel the sound waves beating and fluttering between you. And I always get the sense that it's vibrating your sternum, your rib cage, but I would argue your heart as well. So Bulgarian folk singing, for me at least, is a very emotional but also physical practice. So once I had discovered the Bulgarian voice as a counterbalance to my hyper-rational American mind, I was not going to let the trail go cold. So once I graduated from Yale in 1996, instead of going on a safe career path of law or investment banking, I came to Bulgaria to dig in to folk singing. And I must say that thank you to the wonderful Bulgarian people and your language, your music, your culture, that I have learned so much about getting out of my head and getting into my heart. And the rakia did not hurt in that respect as well. But at a certain point, maybe about 10 years ago, I still felt like something was still missing a little bit. Okay, I'd learned to make my heart sing, but I still couldn't quite connect it up to that rational mind of mine. It's like I could flip from cold thought to hot emotion, but where was the blended mixed tone if we're gonna flog this vocal metaphor to death? So this, of course, is not a problem unique to me, although I might be a pretty extreme example. I think since my buddy Descartes, Western society has been plagued with this problem of how do we connect the mind and the body, the mind and the heart. 20th century philosophers like Hannah Arendt, Zygmunt Bauman have even pointed out that modernity's valorization of the rational at the expense of the emotional has actually led to the horrors of World War II and the Holocaust. So it's a good thing we live in the 21st century, right? The post-truth, postmodern era of fake news and alternative facts. Not so much. I think if we look at the headlines now, the world is not in much better place than it was in 1939. It's like we've ditched rationality and then swung hard in the opposite direction. And what holds power now is not rational argument, but unfettered emotion. And social media users, I'm sure you all know some of these people, they don't even care anymore if a meme or a reel is even true. What's important is how it makes us feel. Angry, amused, exalted, seen. But the heart unconnected to the mind is easy prey for manipulation, so it makes it absolutely just as dangerous as the mind disconnected from the heart. So, what to do? Turns out my time at Yale held the seeds of the solution, for me at least. I was a linguistics major, and so we were required to study either ancient Greek, Latin, or Sanskrit. And I, of course, being a totally impractical person, I'm not 100% German. I was like, well, of course, Sanskrit. Like, when else am I going to learn Sanskrit? So for 3 years at Yale, I studied classical and Vedic Sanskrit, as well as a little bit of Pali, which was actually the language the Buddha spoke. I was a little bit famous at Yale for making Sanskrit flashcards, for which some of my former classmates still mock me to this day with good reason. But it's only been really in the last decade where my dabbling in Eastern traditions has grown into something more serious and more soulful than rote memorization of grammatical paradigms. And I realized if I really want to connect my heart to my mind, I needed to call in backup even more powerful than le mystère des voix vulgaires, namely the Buddha. So for the last 10 years, I've been practicing Buddhist Vipassana insight meditation. And lest this sound self-congratulatory, I will hasten to add that it was a million times easier for me to learn the most complicated ornamentation of a non-metrical Thracian folk song than it was to learn to sit quietly and follow my breath. Even after 10 years of fervent daily practice, I still suck at meditation. And it's because of that rational mind. It might have gotten me into Yale, but it's keeping me out of nirvana big time. But thankfully, the German in me is not only rational, but also disciplined. So every morning, I sit down on my meditation cushion for 20 minutes and follow my damn breath. And it's the hardest and most humbling thing I have ever tried to do, including Sanskrit. But every once in a while, when I can stop making my grocery list, stop planning my TED Talk, and actually just relax into the flow, I get this sense of aliveness that is very similar to the feeling I got the first time I heard Bulgarian folk singing. And this shouldn't come as a surprise because there's a core concept in Buddhism that I think might be just what we and I need to get ourselves out of this dualistic bind. And that is chitta. This is a Pali word that's often translated as heart mind, the dash, heart mind. And it refers to a unified consciousness that integrates both thought and emotion. And it seems to me that chitta, or I might translate it as soulful awareness, might be precisely what we need today to be cultivating something that, a state of being that takes into account both logical argument and lived physical emotional experience. Not just critical thinking, but also open-hearted, visceral empathy for other people is what we need to be able to navigate this world of conspiracy theories and rage-fueled memes. So, does this mean that everybody should study Bulgarian folk music and Buddhist meditation? Of course not, although that would personally be my definition of nirvana. Every one of us has to find the way that keeps our connection between our minds and our hearts alive. And that could be through public service, it could be through teaching, creating art, parenting, building a business. There are countless ways. But for me personally, the voice remains the best metaphor of this soulful awareness, because the voice box, the larynx, is actually pretty much anatomically located between our brains and our hearts. So it's a good check. Am I speaking or singing from an authentic place? Am I holding to the middle path, as the Buddha would say, or am I veering up into my intellect or down into my emotions? And it turns out the American poet Henry Wadsworth Longfellow arrived at a very similar insight almost 150 years ago in his work Hyperion. He says, "Oh, how wonderful is the human voice. It is indeed the organ of the soul. The intellect of man sits enthroned visibly upon his forehead and in his eye, and the heart of man is written upon his countenance. But the soul reveals itself in the voice only. The soul of man is audible, not visible." And I'm sorry for this sexist land. We hope we can, give Longfellow a little bit of grace because this was written in 1882. But I think the idea of the voice as the organ of the soul, as a way of expressing our soulful awareness, rings true today. And so I would invite all of you to think about how you can cultivate your authentic, balanced voices. And by that, I don't mean wishy-washy, non-committal, but critical yet empathetic. Can you hear the voice of your heart mind? Can you find that organ of your soul? And when you do, follow it, even if it takes you down pathways that seem as mysterious as Bulgarian folk singing did to a teenager from Minnesota all those years ago. Look for the communities, the choruses where your voice can resonate, even if the harmonies might sound a little bit dissonant at first. Find the place where your voice can sound as loud and as powerful as your great-grandmother's reaping song, because our souls reap what our voices sow. Thank you.